Well, Arlen, it's great to be back together again as we continue these conversations related to living free, and we're continuing the conversation around strongholds and how strongholds get built into our lives. And one of the things that's interesting is the relationship of strongholds to the demonic. And the scriptures indicate that the demonic can have influence on a human being. Beings can be susceptible to them. How so? What are ways that the demonic can have an impact or an influence on us as human beings?
You know, it's interesting. In my car on the way here, I was listening to our local talk radio station, secular show, and they were talking about ghosts because it's Halloween this week as we're meeting. And so one of the announcers was asking the other one if they believed in ghosts. Secular show. And the radio announcer says, well, he said, I don't know that I would incline to say ghosts. He said, but, I believe in spiritual warfare. And then he pulls out a statistics, and he says, read off the statistics of people who believed in ghosts and who believed in demons, and the percentage of Americans who believed in demons, which is surprisingly high. And I just thought it was so interesting that this conversation was taking place on a secular radio station. So all that to say is, demons have influence on us. They influence our thoughts. They can influence our reactions. They can bring temptation. The Bible is full of examples of what demons can do in our lives. Some people go, Satan can't possess you. Well, yeah, we're possessed by the Holy Spirit. But that's not to say, that there's not influence that comes from Satan's kingdom, and we know that's comes through demonic influence.
Yeah.
That's a long answer to a short question.
Well, no, it's a good answer. I think one of the things I like to do is actually use the phrase demonized or demonization because it communicates influence. And I think that's really, if people can focus on that, we'll let all the other little stuff get taken care of. The Lord will explain that to us when we're in heaven. But I think for right now, we just need to know, yes, we can be influenced by demonic beings. With that being the case, what are the three battlefronts from which the enemy loves to come at us in our warfare?
Our own self, right? Our own flesh, and we all have experienced that.
And what do you mean by flesh, Arlen?
Just our sinful nature, the fact that, God created us to be in perfect fellowship with Him, but when Satan deceived Adam and Eve in the garden, that perfect intention was broken, and our nature was corrupted, and so we are subject to sin until things all get made right at the end. And so we live in a broken world, in a broken human body.
So it's the residue of our sin nature that we're dominated by before salvation.
So there's that. And there's the world system. We know that then Satan was given authority because Adam gave it over to Satan. So he has authority over this world system. For me, I kind of liken the world system to the isms. The humanism, the atheism, the materialism, the communism, pretty much the isms, comprise our world system, and they rule our world.
Well, and I think also that's really, I'm glad you brought that up real quick, just to kind of keep going that direction a little bit. What would be some of the components through which the world system, Satan being the ruler of this world, kind of the one who orchestrates everything, what would be some of the systems through which that happens?
Well, just take humanism, right? The belief that mankind is independent of God and that is evolving better and better without God and apart from God. And to the degree that we come under the influence of that thought system, we are coming under the influence of the world system, which is demonically energized. And
so that actually would probably be able to come through things such as education.
Absolutely.
The entertainment industry.
So think about materialism, right? Think about this, just the whole realm of the commercialism, the ads, the ad-driven, how we're such a consumer-driven society. Buy, keep up with the Joneses. To just think about social media. To have some sense of self-worth, look like this person, follow this Instagram account, and I believe that to the extent that those thoughts lead us away from God and God's original design for us both individually and for the world, we're under the demonically energized world system. Yeah,
definitely. So it's the flesh, it's the world system, and the third one
would be Satan himself, and the full-on demonic realm that assaults us in many ways, both seen and unseen. Sometimes it's very evident, and sometimes it's behind the scenes.
And these three probably are not isolated in their operation. There's probably a little bit of an intertwining.
That's right. I think anybody's natural experience can support that. That sometimes it's your own flesh, but sometimes it's your flesh being energized by something else. It's been thoughts that have been planted or influence that you've come under. And then I think sometimes, in the last session when you and I talked about this, I talked about how there's sometimes specific, I think, schemes against us.
Yeah.
That the enemy has an assignment against me, that he wants to thwart me from being who God designed me to be. And so there's going to be some specific attacks and temptations that I may wrestle with that you don't wrestle with,
Well, one of the things that we have found helpful for self-diagnosis and also then for helping others on their journey. And this is the one thing we love about this is we're all on this journey together. We're helping each other along the way. And there's an analogy of a tree and just the different components of a tree and how these components actually help give us a concept of how strongholds can get started, how strongholds can be nurtured, and how strongholds can express themselves. Could you explain for us a little bit about those components? And it might be helpful for others who are listening in to be able to start being able to recognize how they can identify strongholds and their source and how they've been nurtured and their expression.
Yeah, and I'll use myself for an example too, because there's been roots of some of the things that I've dealt with just as a person that I have realized have been strongholds that the enemy has used to disrupt my thinking and attack my relationships and attack other areas of my life. As I start asking the Lord to show me, sometimes that has been praying with other people to help me see what some of those are. Some of them can be clearly seen.
Right.
It's been things like wounds and injustices that have been suffered in earlier parts of our life, whether they were intended or not. Sometimes, you can say, I had an amazing childhood, and I certainly did, but there's always unintended wounds that the enemy takes advantage of. And other people may be able to look back at their childhood and say, oh, I know exactly what those wounds and injustices were. Yeah. Sometimes it can be generational sin patterns, that things that have been entrenched strongholds in families from generation to generation that can be the roots of things that we're experiencing. And sometimes those roots are so far back, you don't consciously know, you've not necessarily seen the behaviors that lead to them, but the strongholds are there, the behavior patterns are there.
What could be, Arlyn, what could be some specific roots? Because we've talked about roots. What might be something to help us identify what a particular root might be? You've used the term...
Like a stronghold root or roots
like a root towards a stronghold.
Do you mean like if there was a generational root of rejection or something like that?
Yeah, it could be generational. I think also too things such as injustices. Yeah. Would be a root or something, because you actually talked about that in the last conversation.
Yes, injustices, an injustice being something that you had no control over that happened to you. You can't change it, go back and fix it. You just have to deal with it. And what has been our response to that, right? That's where the strongholds come out. And you can maybe go into that a little bit later. We can have soul ties with people. Perhaps we've been abused. Many people who have been abused actually end up having what's called a soul tie. A soul tie is when the thoughts of what another person will think or thoughts about that person inordinately control us, or maybe we have a soul tie with someone that we're always trying to please. Right. That can be a root of stronghold issues in our lives. Generational things, soul ties, injustices, wounds. The enemy, I said the enemy's not creative, but he's pretty good at finding ways to infiltrate our thinking and our emotions, our mind,
That's
emotions,
great.
and will.
And so then there's something happens which we identify as the root. And then as that gets nurtured, it starts then to develop into what we've been talking about, which are strongholds.
Right. And then the behaviors would be the fruit, right?
Exactly. The behaviors are the fruit. And in our last conversation, I think it was, you actually used the analogy of abandonment, which would be an injustice and or a love deficit.
Yes. That's another one, love deficit. We didn't.
And so then how that root can actually grow into, and you use a couple of examples. One side, it might be fear. Yes. Another side, it might be control. But that's just an example using that tree as an analogy for that.
There's kind of a passive side, if you look at, if you were to write down all of the things that you possibly think of, all of the strongholds, there's kind of a passive side and a aggressive side, right? So if you kind of fell off on the passive side, you'd be talking about things like insecurity and inferiority and fear and intimidation, a kind of this kind of a response, right? And then the aggressive side would be the person that kind of comes out swinging. You're talking about the domineering, the anger, those kinds of things, the more overt responses. Martin Luther said once, it doesn't matter what side of the horse you've fallen off, you've still fallen off the horse, right?
Yeah, so good. Well, I think one of the things that's helpful for me with that illustration of the tree is I can look at the expressions of the strongholds and realize there's more to it than that. Don't go and just try to keep picking off that fruit. Let's get down to the root, and let's address it at the root level. Well,
to bring our analogies together, in the last conversation that we had, we talked about swatting flies. Right. So it's that would also be like trying to pluck off the fruit. I want to get rid of the fruit. I want to get rid of this. I want to get rid of that. So I want to get rid of that. Why can't I? Right. And it's because we need to go down the tree trunk into the roots and say, okay, why are these behaviors in my life? Why do I think the way that I think? Why do I feel the way that I feel? And how do I get rid of it? It's down in the root.
And I think probably one final thought along the line that just hit me as we were talking was that the motivation for this is not just so that we can have a better life, although that is an outcome and it's something we should always be striving for, but really it's so that we can do a better job of representing Jesus Christ and live a life that honors Him, that's controlled by His Spirit. And boy, as we get a hold of that, it motivates us to say, okay, I'm not going to live with these strongholds. I want to do something about them.
Just by way, if I have a minute for personal testimony, when I look at what God is doing in my life and how He's allowing me to serve Him and serve His kingdom right now, and I look back, say 15, 20 years ago, and I see the strongholds that God in His mercy exposed in my life. Mm-hmm. And that was not a fun process when I was in the middle of it, rooting those things out, exposing the roots. I know you're going to share in later sessions what the tools are, but exercising those divinely powerful weapons. Yeah. But praise God, I have freedom in my life from some of those strongholds that were controlling me and manipulating me. And now because they are gone, God is using me in ways that I never thought possible. I pinch myself every day going, God, I can't believe you let me do that. Yeah. And so, yes, it's not just about me living, a more fulfilled life. It's about making us useful vessels for God's kingdom, so that we can fulfill the purpose that He put us on the earth for. And what better reason is that, right? To go through the hard work, to let that happen.
Well, we have both known each other and our spouses for a long time. So we've actually been able to watch each other and our spouses as well go through this journey of increased freedom. And I think you might say I'm a little bit different now than I was 30 years ago. Part of it can just be going through life and the wisdom of life, but so much of it for me has just been freedom. I mean, just getting set free from this. And quite honestly, in a very respectful way, I've seen you change and watch God bring increased freedom to your life as well. And I think I wanted to kind of close with that just for an encouragement for people. We're not talking about mere conceptual ideology or theories. This is real life stuff that changes life.
Sure is. Amen.
Yeah. Any final thoughts?
Oh, I don't think so. I think we covered a lot. It's good. I think we did.
Well, it's been fun. It's been really good. Have enjoyed this, Arlyn. Thank you so much for your time, and blessings on you.
Yeah, you too.
Okay, thanks.